Two men who ran a people smuggling ring from Caerphilly to move thousands of migrants across Europe have been convicted following a National Crime Agency investigation. On the surface, Dilshad Shamo, 41, and Ali Kadir, 40, appeared to be running a successful car wash franchise in the Welsh town. However, they were actually under surveillance by the NCA investigators who had uncovered their roles in a huge people smuggling ring. The investigation was supported by Gwent police. Mr. Shamo and Mr. Kadir were working as part of a larger OCG to facilitate the movement of migrants from Iraq, Iran and Syria through Turkey, Belarus, Moldova and Bosnia, and ending in Italy, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Germany and France. Many of them were suspected of arriving in the UK. Migrants were offered 3-year tiers of service, the simplest being on foot or via HGV or smaller vehicle, the next by cargo ships or yachts, and the top tier by providing plane travel. Money was lodged with Hawala bankers based in Iraq and Istanbul, who would arrange and obtain funds from migrants travelling on particular routes. Mr. Shamo and Mr. Kadir used WhatsApp to communicate with people smugglers across Europe. Once a deposit was obtained, they would receive an OK for migrants to be moved by a specialist route or timeframe. They also used messaging and social media apps to provide videos from people who had already taken the journey so that they could advertise their routes. In one video, a family travelling by plane details the routes and states, "We are very happy. This is the visa. May God bless him. We are really happy." In another, a man travelling by HGV tells the camera, "Lorry route agreement. Crossing agreement with the knowledge of the driver. Here we have the men, women and children. Thank God the route was easy and good." Mr. Shamo and Mr. Kadir were first arrested in April 2023 before being taken to custody. Mr. Kadir was heard telling Mr. Shamo, "Just tell them that we were buying and selling cars. Just say we do transfer money from our home country." Both answered no comment in an interview. They were charged in February 2024 with offences of facilitation of migrants through Europe. Both appeared at Cardiff Crown Court for trial in the 11th of November. After hearing 10 days of evidence against them, both pleaded guilty to all offences on the 22nd of November. A further hearing will be held in the following week ahead of sentencing. NCA Branch Commander Derek Evans said Ali Kadir and Dilshad Shamo were leading a double life. While on the surface they seemed to be operating a successful car wash, they were actually part of a prolific people smuggling group moving migrants across Europe and taking thousands in payments. Our evidence showed migrants moving under Mr. Kadir and Mr. Shamo made it to EU countries, and we assessed their journeys have and would have continued into the UK. We worked painstakingly to piece together their movements to prove their important roles in the group, from advertising their services through videos to boasting a successful trip on messaging groups. Tackling organised immigration crime is a top priority for the NCA, and we will continue to do all we can to bring those involved in people smuggling networks to justice. The Minister for Border Security and Asylum, Dame Angela Eagle, said, "Criminals like Mr. Kadir and Mr. Shamo put countless lives at risk, smuggling vulnerable people through Europe in a shameless attempt to make cash. We are taking action against the people smuggling gangs, and we will not stop at nothing to dismantle their networks and bring them to justice. Our new Border Security Command will intensify our efforts to disrupt the criminal gangs with cutting-edge technology and increase efforts in transit countries to prevent unsafe small boat equipment reaching the French coast. I'd like to thank the NCA for their tireless dedication to bringing order to our borders and for dismantling Mr. Kadir and Mr. Shamo's operation. Together we make clear that those who undermine the border security will not be tolerated and will face the full extent of the law." Detective Sergeant Simon Thomas of Gwent Police said, "During this investigation we worked closely with the lead officer at the NCA to achieve a common goal, to safeguard those at risk and bring Mr. Kadir and Mr. Shamo to justice." This case demonstrates clearly how agencies can work together successfully to support the victims and target the criminals behind exploitation. In Gwent, we are committed to supporting all victims of modern-day slavery and human trafficking within our communities. A man who tried to smuggle 8 firearms into the UK has been jailed for 8 years and 3 months. Jared Dangle, who is 33, was stopped at the port of Dover in Kent with 8 revolvers in his car on the 15th of July. He was returning from Belgium where he brought the prohibited guns, claiming he thought they were antiques. He was going to give some to a friend and sell the others. Mr. Dangle, who was unemployed, told the National Crime Agency officers he brought the firearms for €3,400 from a business in Holmesbeek, just north of Brussels, which wouldn't ship them because the guns would be stopped during border checks. Despite this, he renewed his passport to travel abroad and tried to bring them into the country. When officers searched his home, they also uncovered an illegal 3D printed firearm. It was not fully viable. Mr. Dangle of Garris Brick Drive, Walton, Liverpool, admitted importing the original lethal purpose firearms and possessing a 3D printed firearm, and was sentenced at Canterbury Crown Court. NCA Operations Manager Rachel Bromley said, "The NCA works with partners at home and abroad to protect the public from criminal use of firearms. Gun smuggling is an extremely serious offence, and weapons of this type in criminal hands bring significant danger to our communities. Ignorance of the law is no defence." A Liverpool drug dealer who planned to blast the legs of 3 people with a shotgun in retribution attacks has been jailed for 35 years following a National Crime Agency investigation. Michael Rossio, 37, used the encrypted communication platform EncroChat to discuss buying and selling firearms with criminal contacts. Mr. Rossio, who used the handle LeadFern on the platform, told one contact, "I'm trying to get 3 shotties if anyone can help. Going to leg 3 people." Mr. Rossio added he had a Glock. It would be a waste to use it legging someone because law enforcement could potentially use clues from the crime scene to trace the gun and the shooter. Mr. Rossio was sentenced at Liverpool Crown Court. He received 20 years for the firearm offences and 15 years for drug offences. The terms run consecutively. Mr. Rossio admitted using the LeadFern handle to supply heroin and cocaine in 2020, claimed other members of his organised crime group had used the handset to trade firearms, and went to trial but was convicted by a jury in May. The court heard that in an EncroChat conversation on the 18th of April 2020, LeadFern told a contact he had sold a sprayer, an automatic firearm, and asked the contact to chase the £3,000 he was owed for the gun. 20 seconds later, LeadFern told the contact he was going to do some bots, which meant selling heroin. Mr. Rossio of Amberside Road, Allerton, Liverpool, had also had EncroChat conversations with other contacts where he talked about buying and selling semi-automatic pistols such as Glocks and a CZ. In one conversation, LeadFern spoke about wanting to buy back 1 or 2 firearms he had sold to a contact. The contact said, "No mate," and that he had sold them all over the place and could do a load more if you ever get again. At the end of this conversation, LeadFern, having spoken about the guns, offered to let the contact know when he gets some cocaine. Mr. Rossio used the LeadFern handle to send a selfie showing he had lost a tooth. He also sent messages containing his mother's address and an image of his feet sticking out of his bed. When he was arrested at home, the bedroom in the photo matched his own. He also received messages from contacts marking the anniversary of his father's death, and he told one EncroChat user he had amassed 2.5 million in old £20 notes and wanting to change them for new ones. EncroChat was taken down in 2020, and the NCA leads the UK law enforcement response under Operation Venetic. Mr. Rossio was arrested by the National Crime Agency officers on the 30th of June 2020 on suspicion of committing drug offences. He was released under investigation and charged after being arrested again on October the 24th, 2023 by Merseyside Police Specialist Firearms Officers. John Sayers, the NCA branch manager, said, "Operation Venetic data has been instrumental in bringing Mr. Rossio to justice and a very large number of other criminals who have endangered our communities by trading firearms and Class A drugs. The NCA works closely with partners such as the Merseyside Police and international law enforcement to combat those threats to the UK." a businessman who used his specialist knowledge to help criminals produce thousands of dangerous illegal drugs, has been jailed for 13 years following a National Crime Agency investigation. Sebastiano Sorrenti, 35, of Swindon, was known to criminal associates as Machine Guy because he gave them industrial pill presses. He also sold associates large batches of Class A and Class C drugs. The NCA began its inquiries in 2021 following the conviction of Kyle Bryn, 33, of Paisley, for drug offences investigated by Police Scotland. In 2020, Police Scotland recovered pill presses which Mr. Bryan's organised crime group used to produce Etzolam, a Class C drug which in the same year was a factor in more than 800 drug-related deaths in Scotland. It was evident from WhatsApp messages on Mr. Bryn's phone that the equipment had been provided by a contact saved under the name Machine Guy. NCA officers were able to attribute the number for Machine Guy to Mr. Sorrenti, who ran a company that supplied equipment to legitimate pharmaceutical businesses. In June 2022, NCA officers, assisted by Wiltshire Police, arrested Mr. Sorrenti at his home. They recovered pill press stamps, Scottish banknotes and tablets containing Etzolam and MDMA. The stamps helped prove Mr. Sorrenti provided Mr. Bryn's group with equipment because of their designs, imitation of the WhatsApp and Snapchat logos, matched branding on pills recovered by Police Scotland. Mr. Sorrenti also sent Mr. Bryn messages discussing delivery of equipment and advance on fixings and malfunctioning press. His service to organised crime groups extended to giving guidance to making Etzolam pills, including sending Mr. Bryn a recipe to make 140,000 tablets. Photos shared by the co-conspirators indicate the group's criminal dealings were lucrative. NCA drugs expert amassed a single haul of MDMA in one picture to be worth more than £600,000. In another exchange, Mr. Bryn sent Mr. Sorrenti a picture of a quad bike, which was to be part payment for the drugs. Among more than 4,000 messages were examined by investigators. Mr. Sorrenti discussed evading police detection, little realising that his communication would ultimately lead the NCA to him. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Mr. Sorrenti denied supplying the drugs to criminals in Scotland. He claimed his phone number had been spoofed. However, a forensic examination of the phone by NCA officers found no evidence of spoofing. Furthermore, cell site data retrieved by investigation team proved Mr. Sorrenti had made numerous trips to Scotland on dates correlating with messages arranging collection and delivery of illicit goods. Subsequently, Mr. Sorrenti pleaded guilty to all charges against him and was sentenced immediately afterwards. NCA lead investigator Rory Duffin said, "The NCA investigation found Mr. Sorrenti was providing criminals with professional standard customer service, supplying equipment, ingredients and instructions to create hundreds of thousands of potentially fatal drugs, and troubleshooting problems that arose. Working with Police Scotland, we've ensured that Mr. Sorrenti, who played a critical role for a number of organised criminals, is now in jail." A senior member of an organised crime group that ran an industrial-scale amphetamine lab in Scotland and trafficked heroin and cocaine has been convicted following his extradition by the National Crime Agency. Colin Wright, 38, from Torre Pacheco in Marica and formerly of Motherwell, was arrested by the Spanish National Police in March this year at the request of the NCA and returned to the UK on the 4th of October. A number of high-value items were seized from his Spanish address. Mr. Wright had travelled abroad in August 2020 and remained in Spain to avoid capture after NCA officers apprehended fellow OCG members in March 2021. Mr. Wright was head of the OCG's Scottish arm and was actively involved in the supply of cocaine and heroin in both Scotland and England. He worked closely with Terence Earl, 50, who was jailed for 16.5 years in April 2023, and Terence's cousin, Stephen Earl, 52, who was jailed for 11 years and 4 months in August this year. Mr. Wright used the EncroChat handle to communicate with Terence. He also sourced drugs, amassed supply routes and found customers. He created the amphetamine lab in Motherwell. In March 2020, as the nation entered its first COVID-19 lockdown, criminal associate delivered boxes of alpha-phenylacetamide, APAA, part of the amphetamine production process, to Mr. Wright. Over the next few days, the OCG began preparing the lab, but despite messages between them saying the farm or lab was ready, they struggled to obtain the necessary solvent for the production process. Mr. Terrence and Mr. Wright had also exchanged photos of the liquid being treated to check what colour it should be. Mr. Wright helped ship at least 10 kilos of heroin and 7 kilos of cocaine, with the former moved from Merseyside to Motherwell and the latter in the opposite direction. He pleaded guilty to 5 drug charges at Liverpool Crown Court. The NCA's investigation formed part of Operation Fennec, the UK's NCA law-led investigation response to the takedown of EncroChat service in July 2020. NCA branch commander John Sayers said, "Colin Wright was an integral member of this high-harm criminal organisation, which posed a serious danger to communities across Scotland and Merseyside. The drugs they trafficked would have fueled violence and exploitation in these areas." Mr. Wright's case also shows that there is nowhere to hide for the criminals who seek to avoid arrest by living overseas, as the NCA has international scope to fine you and make you pay for your crimes. A National Crime Agency investigation has led to the conviction of 3 men for people smuggling offences, including a fixer suspected of being behind dozens of cross-channel small boat crossings. Birmingham-based British national Pistwan Jamil, aged 54, who came to the UK from Iraq in 2002, had contacts with people smuggling gangs based in France. He would broker spaces for his clients whilst also collecting payments in the UK. The NCA surveillance officers watched as Mr. Jamil had met one such client, Albanian national Artan Haljaj, 39, in Birmingham on the 1st of September 2023. A handover of cash took place, and shortly afterwards, Mr. Jamil made a phone call in which he was heard to say that he had "my 3 passengers all good to go, okay?" Artan, who at the time was living in Southall, had himself arrived on a small boat from Belgium earlier that year. He claimed asylum but disappeared from the hotel where he was supposed to be staying, as his claim was processed by the Home Office. Artan was organising passage for his relative, Fiorentino, 25, who crossed the channel in a small boat the next day, on the 2nd of September. His phone was taken into possession of the immigration authorities, but it was later handed to the NCA, who it was found to contain contact for Jamil. Over the following days, NCA officers were able to record his side of a number of conversations Mr. Jamil had with criminal associates, in which he arranged crossings for his customers, often referring to migrants as pigeons or sticks. On one occasion, he complained that competition in the people smuggling market was driving prices down. In another conversation, he claimed to have made at least $2 million for his criminal networks through his contacts. Another conversation suggested that he was involved in moving migrants to Turkey from the Middle East and expected to earn around $10,000 from the enterprise. Artan and Jamil were arrested by NCA officers on the 23rd of October 2023, while Fiorentino was arrested the following day at Immigration Detention Centre where he is being held. Jamil's phone was found to obtain information and messages relating to up to 50 people who had entered the UK illegally on small boats during 2022 and 2023, including images taken on the boat in the channel. Artan and Fiorentino were both charged with 1 count of facilitating illegal immigration, while Jamil was charged with 2 counts. Jamil and Fiorentino pleaded guilty, while Artan denied involvement. He was found guilty following a weeks-long trial at Birmingham Crown Court. All 3 will be sentenced on December the 3rd. The NCA's investigation was supported by Immigration Enforcement, Criminal and Financial Investigations, as well as Border Force. NCA Branch Operations Manager Paul Jones said, "It was clear from the evidence we were able to gather over the course of our investigation that Pistwan Jamil was a prolific UK broker for people smuggling gangs in France. The true number of crossings that Jamil facilitated will never be known, but the evidence indicates that he has been assisting in the movement of migrants illegally into the UK for a considerable amount of time. People smugglers like him don't care about the safety and security of those they transport, and he was quite happy to put people's lives in life-threatening situations on the sea in flimsy dinghies just so he could make money. This is why tackling the gangs involved in organised immigration crime remains a priority for the NCA, and we will do all we can to disrupt and dismantle them." A man who hid a self-loading pistol and 13 kilos of cocaine in his wardrobe has been jailed. Albanian national Ikrali Rustemi, 33, from Herefordshire, was investigated by officers of the Organised Crime Partnership, a specialised unit comprised of Metropolitan Police and National Crime Agency officers. In October last year, the OCP instructed Cambridgeshire Police Armed Officers a white Citroen DS3 on the A10 at Buntingford, which was being driven by Mr. Rustemi. After receiving intelligence that those inside had access to a firearm, established that Mr. Rustemi was an absconder from the immigration enforcement with no leave to remain in the UK. Officers searched the vehicle and seized the key from the central console, which opened a chalet-style apartment in the garden of a house in Penton Drive. OCP officers searched the property and found a 9mm self-loading pistol and 6 rounds of ammunition in the magazine, which had been wrapped in a towel and placed in a wardrobe, alongside cocaine with the estimated street value of £700,000. Cocaine was mostly separated into 1 kilo blocks, but was also found in smaller quantity dealer bags. A range of equipment associated with drug dealing was discovered alongside, included heat seals, plastic shrink wrap, snap bags, a tick list with handwritten figures, and a Stanley knife. Officers also recovered a set of magnetic vehicle number plates. Mr. Rustemi was arrested and charged with firearm, ammunition and drug possession offences. He pleaded guilty at St Albans Crown Court and was sentenced to 11 years imprisonment at the same court. His conviction means that the organised crime group he belonged to has now been dismantled. Andrew Tickner from the Organised Crime Partnership said, "The OCP's primary mission is to protect the public from dangerous offenders like Mr. Rustemi, whose crime group has now been dismantled. The serious criminality he was involved in fuels violence, intimidation and exploitation in communities, with the supply of drugs and firearms often inherently linked. Our commitment to pursuing the most harmful criminals is unwavering, and we will continue to bring them to justice for their crimes." An organised crime group that used a haulage company as a front to smuggle millions of pounds of cocaine into the UK has been dismantled by the National Crime Agency. 3 men have now been jailed as part of an extensive NCA investigation that began in February 2023 when a lorry was stopped at the port of Killinghorn, Lincolnshire. Border Force officers searched the vehicle, which had travelled across the Hook of Holland by ferry, and discovered 290 kilos of cocaine hidden amongst sliced mushrooms. The 35-year-old driver, Darryl Sellers, was jailed for 13.5 years last June after pleading guilty to importing Class A drugs. Mr. Sellers and his co-conspirators, Ryan Dobb Clark and Peter Crunkhorn, both aged 30, worked for Merck Trans Limited, a Scunthorpe-based haulage company. Clark, the firm's operation manager, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import and conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Mr. Sellers also pleaded guilty to 2 additional charges, and last month a jury found lorry driver Mr. Crunkhorn guilty of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. All 3 men were sentenced at Grimsby Crown Court. Mr. Dobb Clark was jailed for 18 years and Mr. Crunkhorn received 12 years. Mr. Sellers was sentenced to an additional 10 years to be served concurrent with his existing sentence. The NCA's investigation found that Mr. Sellers and Mr. Crunkhorn made 7 other lorry trips to the Netherlands and back in the weeks before the 290 kilo seizure. These journeys were orchestrated by Mr. Dobb Clark. Once the lorry returned to the UK, either Mr. Sellers or Mr. Crunkhorn would then drive from North Lincolnshire to South Wales in another vehicle to deliver the drugs for onward supply, and directed by Mr. Dobb Clark. Mr. Sellers was tasked with the first drugs run from the 15th to 17th of January 2023, and the same method was used for the following importations. Vehicle tracking data obtained from the lorries by NCA investigators enabled them to trace the journeys. On a subsequent trip, Mr. Crunkhorn boarded an overnight ferry to the Netherlands on the 24th of January before driving his lorry to the village of Kesteren the next day to pick up a legitimate load of cargo. He then drove out of Alblas. At the same location Mr. Sellers made a stop at on the 16th of January and remained there for just over half an hour. During this time, he made a series of calls to Mr. Dobb Clark. NCA investigators believe drugs were loaded into the lorry at this location. After arriving back in North Lincolnshire on the morning of 26th of January, Mr. Crunkhorn immediately drove to South Wales in a Vauxhall Insignia. As he travelled down, Mr. Dob Clark arranged for the drug dealers to meet Mr. Crunkhorn in Cardiff and Swansea to accept deliveries. The NCA investigation linked Mr. Crunkhorn and Mr. Dob Clark to the drugs courier operation being ran through Merck's Trans Limited, and they were arrested in the months after Mr. Sellers was intercepted with the 290 kilo haul. Their phones were seized and the NCA investigators discovered WhatsApp messages sent by Dob Clark referencing the drug importations alongside self-portrait photos in a small plane and boat. A message he sent to Mr. Crunkhorn read, "Can you do Holland next week? Go Thursday night. So back Saturday in the morning. I need answers, mate, please." Julie Brooker, NCA branch commander, said, "Dismantling the networks responsible for importing and distributing harmful drugs is a key part of the NCA's mission to protect the public from serious and organised crime. These men mistakenly thought they could hide their criminality behind legitimate companies, but our thorough investigation foiled their operation and put them before the courts. This investigation has prevented a huge amount of Class A drugs reaching the UK county line supply chain, where it would have fueled violence and exploitation of children and vulnerable adults." A man from Leeds who tried to smuggle more than 100 kilos of cannabis into the UK via Heathrow Airport has been jailed following a National Crime Agency investigation. Nathaniel Benson, 45, arrived at the airport on Wednesday the 18th of September, having flown from Bangkok in Thailand. He was arrested after Border Force officers located 150 packages in 5 suitcases. His 2 children were travelling with him, and a case had been checked in under one of their names. In total, more than 100 kilos of cannabis was recovered, which would have had a street value of around £2 million if sold on the streets in the UK. After being interviewed by NCA investigators, Mr. Benson was charged with importing Class B drugs. He was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months imprisonment at Ilsworth Crown Court after pleading guilty at Uxbridge Magistrates Court on the 20th of September. A 41-year-old woman from Harrogate who was travelling with him was also arrested but later released under investigation. NCA Senior Investigating Officer Mark Abbott said, "Anyone thinking of smuggling cannabis into the UK should take notice of the sentence given to Nathaniel Benson, who will now spend time behind bars. Earning money by acting as a drugs courier may seem appalling, but it is not worth the risk. The organised criminals behind these attempts do not care about the fate of those who employ to smuggle cannabis, as their primary concern is financial gain. We will continue to work with our partners in Border Force to tackle the gangs responsible for this trade." In August, the NCA issued a warning to travellers arriving into the UK from Thailand, Canada and the USA that they will face jail sentences if caught attempting to smuggle cannabis into the country. The amount of cannabis seized in the UK so far in 2024 is 3 times more than the whole of 2023. The increase in these seizures is fueled by organised crime gangs who have access to cannabis grown overseas in locations where it is legal, who are recruiting couriers to transport it to the UK, where it can generate greater profit for them than growing the drugs themselves. People travelling with the drugs as couriers reported being told by their recruiters that they were only risking a fine if caught. However, the maximum sentence for cannabis importation in the UK is up to 14 years in prison.